What is up, guys? In today's video, we're going to be talking about Fortnite buffing the Infinity Blade because that just happened this afternoon. And then I'm also going to go over some tips and pieces of advice for playing against this. As always, if you guys do enjoy this video, find it helpful, informative, or interesting, remember to give it a like, subscribe if you'd like to see more. Comment down below what you think of the Infinity Blade. And if you guys would like to use my code in the shop when getting anything, it is EvolveJake, just like my channel name is. First of all, what Fortnite did is pretty straightforward and very simple. They made each attack of the Infinity Blade deal 125 damage instead of 90 or 110 depending on the attack. And what this means is that in zero build, each attack will now only take 2 hits to eliminate a full HP opponent. Previously, it would be like 3 hits to eliminate a full health opponent. So this is pretty straightforward and a pretty simple buff. It will now take 2 hits instead of 3. And this might not sound like a huge deal, but because of how slow the Infinity Blade swings, this actually is a pretty big difference in terms of like how fast this thing will eliminate you and how threatening it is to actually play against. Because there is some, pieces of advice or tips that I have when playing against it. But for the most part, prior to the buff, I feel like you could just play normally. And if they try to melee you to death, you're going to out DPS them with pretty much any weapon. Now you're kind of cutting it a bit close. So as far as like this buff, I think it probably will be pretty noticeable, but it doesn't really change how I feel about the Infinity Blade too much. I still think that it's something that is going to be a better mobility item than it is an actual weapon, and we'll kind of get to that in a bit. As far as playing against this goes, like I said, the buff didn't change too much. I think one of the biggest problems that a lot of people have with the Infinity Blade is they kind of think about it too much or worry about it too much or tunnel vision on the person too much. They play the fight differently or feel differently going into the fight because the enemy has the Infinity Blade. And the person who has the blade does have a bit more health at 125 health and 125 shield and then 50 overshield. So 300 total. It's a bit more, but with how fast the weapons deal damage this season, especially the mid-range weapons like the Thunderburst SMG, the pistol, the combat AR, all of these weapons absolutely melt. And typically when dealing with a melee weapon, you're going to want to keep your range anyway. So that little bit of added HP, I don't think is a huge deal. And just staying calm when dealing with this is probably the most important thing because it really isn't that big of a deal. Just like any melee weapon, keeping your distance is going to be the safest option when fighting it. But because of the leaping mobility the blade has at times, it can be kind of hard to eliminate the person using it if you play solely to keep your distance, right? If you're always just, running away, backing up, looking back, and then shooting, the person using the blade will probably just be able to leave whenever they want, unless you get them incredibly weak before they try to leave. The leap allows them to travel far and very quick. And so if you're really adamant about killing them, you're probably going to need to push into them somewhat. But also, just keeping your distance, getting damage on them, and making them leave, I don't think is the worst thing ever. Because as the game goes on and as we get into the later zones, I feel like the leaping mobility is actually a bit of a problem. Whenever you are fighting the Infinity Blade, mobility is going to be the most important thing. Having the 7 power gloves and the overdrive nades is going to be a huge game changer. Not only for keeping your distance, but also for fighting in close range. It's very simple to see how mobility would help you keep your distance. If you're getting pushed by the blade user, overdrive away, now he has to chase you, right? But when it comes to fighting the blade user in close range, like I said, most of the time you're probably going to need to get close to them if you actually do want to eliminate them because of that added HP, unless they really mess up. The overdrive effect of the overdrive nade is actually really helpful because this makes your jump kind of like floaty, especially if you sprint jump. And this could be pretty helpful at evading the melee attacks for the blade and potentially like ending up behind the sword user or breaking their camera. What they want you to do is just kind of stand there. And if you're jumping and floating around because of the overdrive nade, you're making their life a lot harder. The Flowberry Mist will also, allow you to float around in air and just make it harder for them to hit you. And you can kind of just sprint jump away from them and then look back and shoot with your spray weapon. And if all they're trying to do is melee, then you're not going to have a hard time eliminating them at all. And they're not really going to be that threatening. The dashes you can get from the purple water in the desert area, again, just makes you pretty evasive. And if you do end up in a situation where they get on you, you could just dash away, continue to do damage. And while they do have 50 more health than you potentially, any of these spray weapons can deal so much damage so fast that it really isn't going to be that hard to eliminate them if all they're doing is trying to melee you. And then finally, obviously, the 7 power gloves, these are going to be the most obvious counter because you can, uppercut in air and then shoot down on them. You can dash around with it to, get away from them. Some people don't know you can actually just go straight backwards with the gloves. The gloves send you in the direction that you're moving when you use it. So you could just go straight backwards, create distance between you and them, and then unload on them with some sort of spray weapon and, deal a lot of damage really quickly. If you do end up super close to them for whatever reason at the point where they're about to start meleeing you, the uppercut attack from the gloves is going to be one of the best counters because you can send them up and kind of away from you. And this is not only going to get damage on them and potentially protect you from the melee aspect, it also makes them kind of useless at this point because now they're just in air floating with a melee weapon, and then you can unload on them while in air and then easily get that elimination, right? Be careful though with the glove uppercut and trying to force this, because I've had times where I've tried to force it to get examples for videos, and I'll have a clip on screen now where I was trying to force the uppercut on this guy just to show it, and he just pulls out a Chaos Reloader shotgun and then hits me really hard. And then the fight gets really rough and I'm about to lose this game. Those are the most dangerous people with the sword. The ones who still use their weapons and don't rely on it too much. And that's why most of this video, I've kind of painted it that way. I've talked about the person relying on the melee or only going for the melee. Those are the easy people to deal with. The people that are going to be problematic are people that use the sword mostly as a mobility item or mostly as a tool to get HP or as a tool to regen shield. And then they're still fighting you with regular weapons. At that point, you have to just play it like a normal fight and somewhat ignore the sword aspect and just play as if there's somebody that has more HP than what the typical player would. Still, if you get damage on them and you want to push that, get them out of the game, that works. But you don't have to overthink it or play it so different. And I think a lot of times playing like it's just a melee weapon and expecting it to be only a melee weapon can be a huge problem, like in the situation I outlined, where I'm expecting him to just try to sword me, and then he pops me with the Chaos Reloader and just does so much more damage. Another type of player I run into that might be pretty annoying is going to be people that just use the lunge ability to run away constantly. And then typically these people get the infinite sprint from the rivalry board as well. And they're just an absolute menace on the map. They're lunging around everywhere. They're kind of hard to eliminate just because they're moving around so quickly. And with these people, I think it's just kind of best to let them go. And I've kind of been talking about this as well, where people tunnel vision and focus too much on the Infinity Blade. And then that's what's kind of costing them. Because once you get into the later stages of the game, the lunge aspect kind of becomes somewhat of a burden. Because it's hard to not go very far with it. And so if you're encountering somebody that's just spam lunging around, and then it's down to just you and them in a final circle, you could just let them lunge around and then they'll go into storm, probably take a good amount of damage. They'll lunge out of storm, maybe go into it again. It becomes hard to stay in zone if their people are spamming this in those smaller zones. And then also if they're not spamming it, you'll get a bunch of damage on them anyway. So if I am playing and I encounter somebody that's just okay, this person's just going to keep spamming this, I'm probably just going to ignore them. I'll kill them if I can, but I'm not going to over chase them or over worry about them too much, because that's where it can be problematic. I'm just going to focus on eliminating the other players, make it a 1v1 or, if it's team modes, we'll get to that in a second, make it down to you and them. And then at that point, they're not going to be as much of a problem. Again, expect them to have some sort of weapons. If you let your guard down too much and play like it's only a melee weapon, that can cost you. And then in team game modes, it's going to be the same thing. Just play the fight how you would normally. If they get on you with the sword, try to use your mobility. If you're pushing somebody using the sword, kind of understand that you want to be close to them to do damage, but not so close that you can be meleeed. And using your mobility, like the floatiness of the overdrive grenades, your 7 power gloves should allow you to easily do that. But the lunge aspect being such an absurd mobility aspect, I feel it can create natural separation in team mode. So they might leave and then you just get, a free numbers advantage versus their teammates. Or maybe they push too far away from their teammates. You and your team can focus them down, knock them easily, and then they gifted you a huge numbers advantage. So while some of the things I talked about might be a bit different in squads and duos and stuff, at the same time, it can kind of help you because it's very easy for them to just be out of sync with their team because it is such a unique mobility. And nobody else on the team can really match that. So I think in team game modes, it's actually more of a problem than it is good. And that bonus HP they get is also less of a benefit in team game modes because you can team shot and then just melt them incredibly quick. if you absolutely hate playing against this, one thing you can do is just try to prevent enemies from getting it, because when the Rift anomaly spawns and the Infinity Blade is on the map, it will actually leave after that storm phase if nobody picks it up. So if you just try to go there and gatekeep it and prevent an enemy from getting it, you could get it and hide it yourself, but also just, you know, stopping anybody from picking it up at all and having it despawn is more of a guarantee than hiding it. So if you absolutely do hate it, when you see it spawn in, try to stop anybody from getting it. And then that might also, you know, make it to where it's not a problem later on. But that is going to be it for this video. As always, if you guys did find this to be helpful, informative, or interesting, remember to give it a like, subscribe if you'd like to see more. Let me know what you think about playing against the Infinity Blade and this buff they gave it. And I will see you guys in the next one. Thanks for watching.